All right, here we are. Welcome to BOOKWAVE, the book club podcast. And if you're new around here, you can check out our website at www.bookwave.club. And today we're going to be breaking the first two rules of Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. Spoiler alert, consider yourselves warned. My first question to you, the audience, is how many of you actually knew this was a book to begin with? And today I'm joined with my boys PatMan and Will. And my question to you guys is, what was your biggest takeaway while reading this book?
I think the biggest takeaway for me, aside from the fact that the writing style was incredibly brilliant, is just how much Hollywood decided to change. And that came out a lot in the last chapter. But I found it weird that in the movie, they are saying Tyler is trying to destroy all of the credit card companies with his big explosions at the end and put the credit back to zero. Whereas in the book, he's actually trying to descend the United States into this anarchic state where he's removing all of human history. And so that complete difference was the biggest shock for me.
Definitely. Learning how far Tyler is going to go, and the narrator, whom we'll call Joe, because in the book he mentions the name Joe many times. He is just discerning everything that's going on around him, and this internal struggle that he has, whether to just go along with what Tyler is doing, along with Project Mayhem, or just decide, hey, maybe we should just slow things down a bit. Let's think about it, what's going on. And of course, there's that famous line by Tyler Durden where he rants about how men are in this spiritual struggle, and the greatest oppression is themselves. It's a spiritual one, and they were not. They always had high expectations about being the next rock star or the biggest movie star or building homes and everything like that. But society just treats them differently, and everything just kind of shutters down. And I always wondered if they were ever going to pick an alternative where they don't have to develop this anarchic behavior, but just find another route where they can make a plan to develop themselves without causing trouble or mayhem in this instance. But they don't. Instead, through Fight Club and expressing their behavior, their antisocial behavior, which is what I found to be very not just accurate, but very disturbing. The way that Palahniuk portrays the characters, it's amazing how their behavior develops over time, and that's what I took away from the book.
What about yourself, Scott?
Well, there was a number of things. The one line where he says, when you're Christian and you're male, your father is your image of God. Then what happens when our fathers leave us? What does that say about God?
Yeah, there was a lot of interesting points that he wrote about with God and father figures, and it was interesting that was kind of almost a central point to the.
Yeah, and that brings in my fan theory that I came up with while reading this, which suggests that Joe's father actually, because I think it's Tyler that says that my father left me or whatever when I was really young. And then Joe talks about how Tyler and Marla fighting with each other are exactly how his parents used to fight, just carrying messages back and forth between each other. So I'm thinking that his father actually left him at a very early age, and he just started manifesting the image of his father the same way that he manifests the image of Tyler. So like the same way that he created the image of Tyler because he needed it to find a place to live, he also created the image of his father so he could, get through childhood.
That's an interesting theory, much better than the bathhouse theory that was discussed in the after.
I don't know, I like that one.
A little more G-rated, I'll say.
Yeah.
I mean, reading this book was really fun because it's a break from our usual books, and it isn't forcing us to have to intellectualize and analyze. It was just a really good experience, and I got a lot more out of the afterword than I did the whole book. And I think the biggest thing that was surprising for me is just how much they dumbed down the content of the book when they turned it into a movie. Like, you look at we'll call him Joe, his boss in the movie. They blackmail his boss just like they do with several other jobs that they have, like in the service industry and in the film industry. But in the book, he blows his boss up.
Yeah, that was pretty surprising. Like we all
I did
remember
not.
that we all
Yeah,
remember that scene from the movie where he's just beating himself up in front of his boss, but that actually happens with a different employer of his at like the restaurant or
yeah,
whatever in the book. And in the book, his boss that you see in the movie all the way through has quite a different fate.
It also came out of nowhere too in the book where he exploded.
Well, it was interesting because, like, I distinctly remember that fight scene and finding it hilarious and awesome in the movie, where he's reminded of his first fight with Tyler and ends up walking out of the business with a shopping cart full of fax machines and printers and a paycheck for an indefinite period of time.
Yeah,
Whereas,
little record scratch like for some reason this reminded me of my first fight with Tyler, and it keeps going. And yeah, in the movie it's really funny, but in the book
yeah,
it's just dark.
so much darker and also so much more in depth. Like in the movie, you see them when they're ramping up Project Mayhem and they're building the bunk beds in the basement and they've got the garden going on, and you kind of understand that they're making soap, but the level of depth that they describe all of the different flowers and the purpose for all of the flowers in the garden to flavor and scent the soap was almost like reading a book on how to make soap. Like there was a lot of information there.
Yeah. There's like an instruction manual on how to make dynamite in there too. Not that we condone
Napalm.
anybody making dynamite or napalm.
Yeah. Just
That
how
was,
easy it was to make all that too.
yeah, there was a lot of interesting stuff. I definitely prefer the book over the movie, like hands down. I mean, I usually do when it comes to books and
Yeah.
movies,
That
but
was one thing I
wow,
was
it
like a
was.
little afraid to start this book. I'm like, I never like to read the books of movies that I really, really like in case it just ruins the movie for me. But this one I was pleasantly surprised. I don't think it ruined the movie for me at all. Like I can definitely keep going back to the movie and keep enjoying it. But yeah, the book
Yeah,
was definitely
absolutely.
better.
Well, since we gone through a lot of intellectual material in the past on this podcast, there are some interesting themes in this book that I kept thinking about throughout my reading and after reading it. What did you guys find that was very interesting?
There was the Jungian shadow concept that kept popping up.
There's that,
Developing your
and
shadow.
also, I almost want to attribute the conversation that's been going on in the past maybe 10 years about the special snowflakes in our society. I want to attribute this book to birthing that concept because, I mean, we've seen the movie, but in the book, this whole notion that you are not special, God doesn't love you,
Yeah.
it's
You are
really
not
hammered down.
you are not a beautiful and unique snowflake. You're the same decaying organic matter as everyone else, and we are all part of the same compost pile.
Yeah, and it seems like folks today don't really seem to grasp that. They find it hard to comprehend.
What do you mean? Can you expand on that?
Well, I guess comprehend is the wrong word, but I guess just accepting that notion is very hard to grasp. Like how on college campuses, biology is considered like a construct or whatever, or male or female are considered a social construct, but they don't understand that men and women are completely different biologically. And that quote pretty much sums up everything. It sums it all up. And we're just all bags of flesh We have different diseases. We are immune to different diseases. We have different mental disorders. And even though we are on the same compost, our outcomes are completely different from the rest, from each individual. That's what I mean.
I think I I hear what you're saying, and I just want to go hard tangent. Because there was a lot of opportunity for Tyler's philosophy to just take a deep dive into nihilism, but his decision to go into anarchism, I found almost inspiring at times. Like when he's giving the homework to come back with 12 license cards and have all of these members of Project Mayhem go out and threaten to take these people's lives if they don't make the best of their life. That was really interesting. Like he was in a position where he could have just said, look, here's a gun, go kill people. But instead he said, no, kill their former self and threaten them with their life if they don't do everything in their power to achieve their greatest dreams. And that was really cool.
That was cool, especially when he threatens that convenience store clerk.
Raymond K. Hessel.
Raymond K. Hess. Which, again, another great scene in the movie. And I think, like you're saying, Scott, I can go back and watch this movie time and time again, and it isn't ruined for me. It's on its own pedestal, separate to the book, but they did a lot of things right. And I think that Chuck was very happy with how it turned out as well.
I hope so. I mean, Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Helena Bonham Carter.
The Avengers of dark movies.
Yeah, the Avengers of dark movies.
The other cool thing, like, honestly, I feel like I got more talking points out of the afterward than the whole book, because when he's going to these book signings after it started to become successful.
Thatcher?
I mean, I wasn't going to explicitly state it, but in loose terms, having all these individuals talking to him and writing into him and saying, hey, you stole our fight club, and the native communities in, or was it Brazil or South America somewhere, that actually do have a fight club, and then they get married afterwards, and it isn't male exclusive. There's a female fight club and a male fight club, and then they go off and they get married. And it's really interesting. Like, his sentiment that he expressed was, there's nothing, is it an Oregon high school graduate can imagine that hasn't been conceived of by a million other people on this planet?
And I also like how he brings up the different books, different women's books, like the Joy Luck Club. Like, there's always books about women sharing their own lives and getting together for a cup of tea and just having a few laughs and everything. There's so many books on those, but you rarely see any books about how men get together and share their own lives. You either have The Great Gatsby or you have Fight Club.
Yeah,
it's very minimal.
I like his one comment that he says, like, this book could have been about Barn Raising Club for all I cared, but Fight Club seemed to fit pretty well.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah, I was going to bring that up as well. And the other point that surprised me was that this was actually just a 7-page short story to begin with. It wasn't really about Fight Club. It was about putting the reader into the thick of things with an interesting narration style that sort of cut quickly between scenes and allowed you to understand what was going on without seeing the bigger picture. And yeah, like, we definitely don't have men's groups. Like, there's no, unless you're an alcoholic, it's very hard to find a support group as a man in today's society. And I think that still hasn't been addressed.
And of course, that's exactly what he looks for in the opening scenes and opening pages of the book. Is he goes to tuberculosis support groups and all kinds of things like that, and guided meditations.
Bowel cancer support groups, testicular cancer support groups. Really, just a way to cure his insomnia and realize that he's not the only one with problems.
But yeah, it's hard for Joe to find a support group for being alive and depressed and a man. And so he has to find these groups that are people that have no hope of survival. That is where he can find real human connection and experience and support, is in the hands of someone who only has a few weeks or a few months left to live. And the funny part for me reading that is the guided meditation sessions, because like I'm trying to get a guided meditation group going right now, because I think that's something that's really important. And it's interesting and humbling to see a satire kind of mocking that whole setup, but also putting it out there. Like, this isn't something that I've read about in a fiction book.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even though it does kind of present it as something to make fun of, he also suggests that, like, hey, this is what you have as community for most people.
I also found that transitioning from these support groups, Joe develops Fight Club, and he finds it to be more real. Being in pain, being punched in the face and in the stomach and everywhere else, and just meeting these different men who are brand new and they have to fight if they're new to Fight Club. And just this montage of all these different fights and people getting bruised and bloodied. He said that was more real than anything else. And it was, I also found it to be a way for Joe to fully exist. He is no longer in this state of comfort. He's no longer crying in Big Bob's chest or just calling out Marla for being a faker. He feels more alive when he's fighting.
It's interesting because I think at some point he does write that at the moment that he saw Marla Singer is when the split happened between Joe and Tyler, because a part of him wanted to love Marla but wasn't capable of it. And that's kind of what birthed Tyler. And the whole perception is projection notion where he's calling her a faker, even though he himself is a faker. And it's like, the only reason you know she's a faker is because you are a faker. And it's that old adage, it takes one to know one. And it was really well written. Like, Chuck did his homework on human behavior. And I really enjoyed reading this book.
His prose is very punk like you would read the lyrics off of a punk rock song. It's very direct, it's assertive, it's funny, and it's real.
And perverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like his other comment in the afterword where he says that so many people have described it with a different genre, and the one thing that was never used was the word romance. So,
which is a shame.
Yeah. Could you see this as a romance novel? Because
absolutely.
I didn't really, as I was reading through it, but when I made it to that part in the afterword, I was like, oh, yeah, I guess it could be.
So I have one more question for you guys. I'm pretty sure we're all kind of dried up in terms of continuing to discuss a good book. We've established that it's good, we've established that we liked it, and we've established that there's not much to intellectualize here. But my question to you is this: is there, and if there is, what is the importance of reading this book? Why would you recommend someone read this? How would this add value to someone's life? What is the importance of this book?
Well, if it isn't obvious enough, this is a book that's mostly for a male demographic. And I said before, when Joe experiences real pain, it's real. There's no other word to describe it. It's very real. And also developing your darker side. This is not just a satire book. It's also very dark. It goes into a lot of dark places. And if you haven't experienced something like Fight Club before, and you've read just your comfort zone of books, the same genre, and you want to be more open to new types of prose, then Fight Club is something you should definitely read. And it also will, you mentioned before that this is something that is missing in today's society. Like many of the what would you call it? The many groups that the many support groups that are actually helping men, get through many problems, helping them develop themselves as individuals, learning how to be a proper man and everything like that. I think the content of Fight Club is still missing in today's society. And if it does exist, it's often ridiculed. It shouldn't be.
Absolutely. Like you are seen as an inferior man if you need to talk about your emotions. I think that's still something that's prevalent in society today, is that toxic masculinity. Women have emotions, men do work. And obviously, to a large degree, we're breaking down those barriers and we are getting to a place where people are able to discuss their emotions. But in terms of support groups, as a man, you've got sports teams, you've got cadets. I know that's a big one. You've got scouts, and these are things that are training you to be better soldiers and better survivalists, but they're not teaching you to be better communicators and better feelers and better at empathy or sympathy, perhaps compassion. In terms of, I know the cadets do a lot of charity work and same with the scouts, but there's no sharing circles for men. Whereas I'd like to say women have that opportunity, but I don't see that even as an opportunity for women either these days. Like, you don't have knitting circles. Women don't knit, do they? I'm a man, I don't know. But
oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they knit a lot.
And so, like, after adolescence, once you're a man and you're an adult, I should say, sorry, outside of church, you don't have a gathering of people that are like-minded to express concern. And even in church, you don't have much of that. There's tea and cookies afterwards, but it's mostly keeping up with the Joneses.
Yeah, there's a lot of little lessons in this book, but I think the main ones are, it's up to the individual to find your community, and you also have to integrate your shadow and your dark side. And that's a lot of what Jordan Peterson talks about too. And the whole reason we started reading this book was because of, a silly meme when we were talking about Jordan Peterson's 12 rules. He just said, "Oh, what's the first rule again?" And someone said, "Well, it's don't talk about Fight Club, obviously." And then someone else said, "Hey, we need to read the book."
I would also like to add how Palahniuk discusses consumerism. In the book and in the movie, there are many posters of men as models. They're showing off their bodies and all these different underwears and makeup, hairstyling. It's all good if you want to properly groom yourself, but you end up turning into something else. You are a product and not a human. And that's also what is consuming a lot of men. They're not being raw, they're not being realistic, they are just artificial.
Yeah, and that takes it back to that famous quote that the things you used to own, now they own you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like, authenticity is a big problem, and there's nothing inauthentic in the center of the ring of Fight Club about expressing rage and destroying something beautiful. You cannot get more authentic and in touch with your emotions than that. Whether or not it's a positive authenticity and the right way to deal with those emotions is a debate completely for another video. So in summing up, I would recommend this book to man, woman, and not child. I think that there is definitely an age limit on reading this one. And I think it's not so much that it's important, but that it's not unimportant. And I think it's good to have perspectives, and it's good to be able to be in a comfortable chair in the warmth of your house, reading about just how dark the dark side of you can get without having to expose yourself to that. You need to be aware of just how ugly things can get, and just how ugly things can get as a byproduct of consumerism and intentions of trying to make things good.
And you also cannot die without having a few scars.
Indeed. I've already done my fair share of scarring this body. I'm trying to take it easy on that regard. I still haven't been in a genuine fight, and I don't think I'm very interested.
Yeah, that's probably the right way to go.
But if you guys want to get together and beat the living crap out of each other, I'm game.
All right, next time we get together, I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
You want me to what?
I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
Where?
I don't care, anywhere.
All right, that's enough for me. How about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things. There's so many other things that we can discuss, but it would just be nothing but rambling. So I think we've pretty much hit the point on this. This is definitely required reading. Something that you should definitely read before you, when you reach the age of 18 or something, and you're about to go off to college, or just read this book, and you'll be surprised and enlightened.
It won't hurt you anyway. But until next time, like, comment, subscribe, and may the force be with you.
Or equal to mass times acceleration.
His name is Robert Paulson.
His name is Robert Paulson.
His name is Robert Paulson.
His name is Robert Paulson.